Good evening from Worcester, where the River Severn now stands at a record level. I must be about 20 or 30 metres from where the riverbank used to be, and yet the water is lapping around my boots. Now, behind me, you can probably see the main bridge across the city. You can't actually really see the arches beneath it. That's how high the river level now stands. Now, today has been a day of recovery after those hurricane-force winds swept through the west of the UK. Wales bore the brunt of it. Tens of thousands of homes have been without power. Now, our Wales correspondent, Hywel Griffith, has spent the day with families struggling to pick up the pieces.
Buildings blown wide open, lorries carried on the wind, and a huge clean-up bill, all left in the wake of the storm.
It's basically picked up the whole roof and then placed it back down again, but it's moved it.
Lizzie Mowatt's home has been in the family for a century and a half, but the gales which struck Porthmadog mean it may no longer be habitable.
I just want to burst into tears, really. I mean, I'm frightened that we've got to move out and we've got nowhere else to go.
For most homeowners, getting power back was the biggest concern. Nearly 400,000 properties across the UK have needed to be reconnected since yesterday. The Prime Minister says companies should reimburse their customers.
We can't legislate for 100-mile-an-hour winds and 1 in 20-year events, but we have mitigated significantly the effects of that wind, and as I say, we hope to get our customers back on supply very quickly.
So they're getting a fair deal?
I believe so, yes.
The winds which swept across Wales and the northwest yesterday were at hurricane force, enough to make static caravans mobile, enough to tear trees from the ground. They also claimed a life. 71-year-old Roger Hayward from Wiltshire died when power cables fell as he was trying to clear a tree. Work is continuing to clear many roads, but it feels like an endless task. These repairs simply add to the millions and millions of pounds worth of work that was already needed after several weeks of severe weather. In the meantime, people are being warned to remain patient and expect delays on the roads and on the rails. Today it was revealed the £61 million pledged by the Prime Minister for repairs will come from funds already allocated. For now, train companies are warning passengers of continued delays. And this is why. Forecasters warn the storm sweeping in tomorrow could be even worse than yesterday's. Britain is having to brace itself all over again. Hywel Griffith, BBC News, Porthmadog.
So while the clear-up from those hurricane-force winds have been continuing today, in other places elsewhere the floodwaters have carried on rising. There are now 17 severe flood warnings for Berkshire, Surrey and Somerset. The latest one, by the way, is for the River Severn behind me. And remember, that means a danger to life. In the Somerset level, the Environment Agency has been making renewed efforts to pump out the water from those areas that have been flooded, well, for many, many weeks now. And as our correspondent Sian Lloyd reports, many here in Worcester are thankful that the defences have held so far.
It's a lifeline for commuters, the only way to get across the city centre. This bridge remains closed to ordinary traffic after the River Severn, which runs through the heart of Worcester, reached record levels. But the people who live here are determined to carry on as normal.
Everybody's cheerful, really. We just get on with it, don't we? Can't do a lot about it.
People can get across, all right. If you want lots of shopping, it's a little more difficult, but general day-to-day, you can get into town, as long as these are running.
The river levels in Worcester have smashed all previous records and may yet rise further.
It is a strain at the moment because of the size of the flood and the fact that it's impacting the whole of the river system. So it is a challenge, but we will see it through.
Flood defences may be holding up, but tonight the army is on standby to support those working on the ground should they be needed.
From here you get a real sense of how this is a divided city and how crucial that bridge is to keeping Worcester working.
But businesses are concerned about the impact of the flooding.
We can't survive without customers, there's no two ways about it, and I think people in Worcester are resilient and they'll be back in, but we've just got to get that message out that we're open and it's business as normal.
Open for business in Worcester, but elsewhere they're closing their doors tonight and protecting against a new flood. In neighbouring Gloucestershire, this community has been warned that river levels will rise here. On the Somerset levels, the extent of the devastation there is captured from space. The land, which is red, becomes green, where it's swamped by water. On the ground, high-powered pumps from the Netherlands have been brought in to clear the floodwater, but the land will take weeks to drain. Along the Thames, gardens and properties remain submerged. Yesterday, from a boat, the BBC filmed Jason McBride, who wouldn't leave his home.
Are you going to leave? No. Why? Nowhere else to go. And my mum lives there, so we're not going to leave without my mum.
Chertsey in Surrey is one of the worst affected areas in the country, and the Army is helping local people there keep the water at bay, although it's too late for many. Back in Worcester, it's business as usual for a city working its way through the storms. Sian Lloyd, BBC News, Worcestershire.
Now today David Cameron has been chairing a new special cabinet committee, and that's its job is to look at long-term plans for the recovery. Let's talk to our correspondent, our deputy political editor rather, James Landale, about this. James, the government's been making further announcements. What more can you tell us?
Well, George, it's been a very busy day here at Westminster. We've had this new Cabinet Floods Committee meeting. We've had questions for ministers in the House of Commons. And tonight, as we speak, the Prime Minister is chairing yet another meeting of the Cobra Contingencies Committee. And from all of that, some decisions have emerged. First, the government is going to fast-track money to local authorities so they can tackle the floods now instead of making them wait and claim the money back in the future. Second, the government's going to give £250,000 to Citizens Advice Bureau so more staff can help out in flooded areas. Third, the Prime Minister had made very clear that no one should have to pay for sandbags. There had been some confusion. Some councils were charging. They'd been told no, they will be compensated. And for the long term, the government said it's going to review the way it funds flood defences in the future so that rural communities don't lose out. For all that activity, Labour have not lessened the political pressure. Ed Miliband accusing the government of being in chaos and confusion and urging the Prime Minister to get a grip. One thing is clear, George, the weather in the short term isn't going to get any better. The Met Office this afternoon are talking of a three-pronged attack tomorrow of wind, rain and snow, with potentially as much as half an inch of water falling in just 6 hours. The rain it raineth every day. George.
James, many thanks. And by the way, don't forget you can get much more detail on the BBC News website. The address should be there on your screen. And of course, you've got your local radio and TV stations. Now, we're going to be back a little later in the programme, but it's now over to you, Jane, in the studio.
Now, as promised, we will, of course, talk more about the floods affecting so very many people. Let's go back to George in Worcester. George.
Thank you, Jane. And yes, and welcome back to Worcester, where you do get the sense that people here are kind of holding their collective breath, hoping that the water doesn't come in any further. Now, over the last few days, we've reported on the pinch points, if I can call them that, places like Worcester and other towns and villages further downstream. But where does all this water come from? Well, today I've followed the River Severn towards its source. The Severn is the UK's longest river. It begins its 220-mile journey in the Cambrian Mountains of mid-Wales. And on that journey through 4 different English and Welsh counties, it's collecting water. With the record rainfall we've had, it's little wonder the river has burst its banks. Now, Chris, you've been flying over this area, since December. What sort of changes have you seen?
Well, I think the biggest change when you look down, the river levels have risen, and we're left with so many new inland lakes that I've never seen before. In fact, it starts to bear very little relationship with what I see on the map.
It's as if the British Isles had multiplied. Hamlets, whole villages now look like isolated islands. Well, just below me I can see a couple of pumps working, and I've got to say, from up here it just looks like a pretty futile exercise, because you see this huge volume of water. The Environment Agency says something like 500 tons of water are passing through every second. It all adds up to a huge logistical challenge for the emergency services, hundreds of people working flat out. What we're seeing downstream now is the aftermath of rain that fell days ago on the mountains. The water takes that long to work its way through. With more severe weather forecast, this crisis is far from over. Well, thankfully, as you saw in my report, the sun was shining, and that gave people all along the river a chance to recover. Now, forecasters are saying that the storm that's yet to come, coming off the Atlantic, could be just as intense as any we've seen so far. So let's get all the detail now with Nick Miller.
Well, George, one fine day, then a storm. That's the story of our winter so far. If you were dry today, you won't be tomorrow. Just a thought about tomorrow's storm. We think it might not be quite as intense as it was actually on Wednesday. But that said, we're still expecting more rain to those areas that don't need any more rain. We'll see some snow to the hillier parts of the north. That could prove troublesome. And all the while, the winds are going to be picking up as well. Let's take a look at the detail. In the short term, things are quietening down. Still some showers of rain, sleet, snow, some heavy hail showers out there at the moment. Most of those will fade. Icy patches are a problem where you've had the showers, the temperatures fall close to freezing. Here comes the rain as the storm moves into the southwest later in the night. First of all then, a Met Office amber warning for rain southwest England. The hillier parts up to 40 millimetres, but generally across southern areas as this comes in, a quick 15 to 25 millimetres up to an inch of rain. Even without the flooding, that would be significant. With it, well, it will just add to the problems. It moves north, a brief spell of snow over the hills of Wales, but to northern England, Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, eventually some snow to the higher routes could prove quite difficult in heavier bursts. Some of that snow may even come down to lower levels before turning to rain. A lot of cold air across the north of the UK, and still some snow around in Scotland and Northern Ireland potentially tomorrow evening. That's one to watch. But all the while, the wind is picking up, and the wind will peak tomorrow evening and night across southern coastal counties of England in particular. Bands of showers working through, but gusts here up to 80 miles an hour along the coastline. A Met Office amber warning for the wind. Big waves crashing into the shoreline. Dangerous conditions, coastal flooding, but even away from the immediate coastline, we could see some gusts 60, 70 miles an hour. Things quieten down slowly on Saturday, more so on Sunday. If you're out and about, keep in touch with the BBC local radio station. Jane.
Nick, thank you very much. And that is all from all of us for this evening on BBC One. We join the BBC's news team